Part 1. The Revelation in the Redacted Life. The sound of the phone hitting the drywall was not a crack. It was the final, echoing gong of a life annihilated, a deafening signal of the end of my 18-year marriage. I didn't flinch. I, Anna, a woman of 43, stood utterly still in the catastrophic epicenter of our kitchen, already a ghost in the ruins of the life I had meticulously built. Mark, my husband, was no longer the college sweetheart of 21 years. He was a colossal, trembling scarecrow, his 6'3" frame vibrating with a terror that was far more profound than simple heartbreak. The sudden, shocking bloom of gray in his hair, a rapid, violent transformation over the last 72 hours, was not the mark of a betrayed husband. It was the pigment of a man who had seen his future, a future built on theft and psychological abuse, crumble into dust. His panic wasn't grief, it was the raw, paralyzing fear of a cornered criminal. "You don't understand the magnitude of what you've done, Anna," he rasped, his voice a dry, papery whisper that sounded like incriminating evidence being shredded. It was never just about the intimacy. It was about the structure. You didn't just sleep with someone else, you committed the ultimate sabotage against the family's defense system. You stole the moral high ground I needed to survive. You stole the leverage. The system he spoke of was the cold, suffocating, perfectly orchestrated grip of his family, the financial manipulations and legal threats from his mother, Evelyn, and the slow, insidious psychological poisoning from his sister, Clara. For 2 decades, I had been the designated target, the necessary enemy, the outsider whose only function was to absorb their cruelty and serve as the reason for Mark's perpetually stressed, controlling demeanor. Every single dollar my supportive, loving parents contributed to our home, the home where I spent countless hours cooking, cleaning, and raising our children, was scrutinized, judged, and labeled a debt by Evelyn, whose ironclad control was fueled by one singular, avaricious goal: to see her lineage, and only her lineage, inherit every last asset. I was merely the obstacle to be eliminated. I remembered the silent years, the long, desiccated drought of our intimacy. 7 years of a sexless marriage where I became a living corpse, moving through life as a high-achieving full-time worker, a dedicated student pursuing advanced qualifications, and a relentless, tiger mom pushing our children into elite schools. I was emotionally starved, spiritually hollowed out, but outwardly functioning, a master of self-control. This relentless pursuit of professional and academic success wasn't ambition, it was a desperate, subconscious strategy for financial independence, a lifeboat I was building while the main vessel of my marriage sank. I remembered the visceral, physiological toll of their abuse. The cold, uncontrollable tremors that would seize my hands, the instant, sickening wave of nausea and fear that would erupt when I merely heard Clara's high-pitched, mocking voice, a textbook PTSD-like somatic response to years of sustained psychological warfare. My hair would literally stand on end, my muscles would tense, ready for a fight that never truly ended. They had played a long game, slowly, deliberately driving me to the brink of despair, hoping for a complete mental and emotional collapse that would invalidate any future action I might take in court. They wanted my departure to look like a voluntary breakdown, a self-inflicted act of madness. The affair, that one single, anonymous, desperate night of feeling, cared for and cherished, of experiencing a fleeting moment of human warmth after years in a sub-zero existence, was not an act of malice. It was the last, frantic, flailing gasp of a drowning woman. It was a symptom, a stark, undeniable flag that the emotional cancer they had planted and nurtured within my marriage had finally become terminal. I had sought one moment of genuine connection, a brief respite from the relentless judgment, and in doing so, I had inadvertently struck a match to their entire criminal structure. Mark's reaction to discovering the infidelity was not the collapse of a heartbroken man, but the calculated, theatrical escalation of a cornered criminal. He didn't just ask for passwords and location trackers, the typical demands of a jealous spouse. He ordered the immediate installation of a cinematic surveillance system, 5 high-definition cameras strategically placed like hidden, digital predators in every common area of the house. One was cunningly disguised within the smoke detector directly above the kitchen island, the very place I spent hours working and planning. Another was hidden in the living room bookshelf, pointed directly at my favorite reading chair, ensuring every moment of my solitary suffering was recorded. "I need to witness your mental state, Anna," he sneered, the cold, corporate cruelty of Evelyn's voice echoing in his throat. He didn't want reassurance. He needed raw, incriminating footage of my inevitable emotional breakdown, documentation of my despair to use against me in the impending divorce. He needed proof that I was the crazy one Clara had accused me of being. I agreed to the cameras, the trackers, the phone monitoring. My soul was already shackled by years of fear and neglect. The physical restraints were just redundant metal, an irritating noise in a room already silent with my suffering. But the agreement was merely a pause before my counterattack. The years I spent fighting for my children's education, the tiger mom obsession that drove me, had honed my skills in strategic planning, information gathering, and ruthless execution. Now, those skills would be aimed at him. Then he unveiled the impossible task, the final, lethal condition for his forgiveness, a desperate maneuver to protect his family's deepest, darkest criminal secret. Clara disappeared immediately after your violent outburst and ultimatum. It shattered my trust in you forever and left a permanent, gaping scar on this family, he announced, clutching his chest with the rehearsed drama of a man fighting off a heart attack. He conveniently ignored the fact that my violent outburst was a desperate reaction to him recording me during an argument and Clara threatening to call the police, a coordinated attack that killed my heart toward his family. You have exactly 7 days, 168 hours, to find her. Bring my sister home, alive, safe, and I will tear up the divorce papers and try to forgive you. Fail, and I will use every recording, every piece of evidence of your madness, your infidelity, and your threats to ensure you are legally stripped of your career, your financial stability, and permanent, unsupervised custody of the children. He wasn't fighting for reconciliation. He was fighting to cover up a felony-level financial crime, corporate theft linked directly to Clara's staged disappearance. He was using me as his unwilling, desperate operative, forcing me to expend all my energy and focus on an impossible search, diverting my attention from the financial fraud that was the true core of their conspiracy. He wanted me to fail, so he could claim his legal victory and secure the house and the assets. His grief was a calculated display of misplaced terror, fear of prison and fear of his mother's retribution, not fear of losing me. He walked over to the kitchen counter and placed a tiny, antique silver key on the cold granite. It was heavy, intricately engraved with symbols I didn't recognize, a small crest of 3 intertwined serpents that seemed to mock me. She left this. A final clue, he lied effortlessly, his eyes darting between the key and the camera lens above. It won't open anything in the house. But it may open the eyes of the person who tried to destroy our family and drove my sister to desperation. Use it wisely. As my fingers closed around the cold, dense metal, a profound and immediate transformation occurred. The submissive, compliant wife was extinguished, like a candle flame in a vacuum. The tiger mom, the relentless warrior who had navigated complex academic systems, fought bureaucratic red tape, and managed multi-million-dollar corporate projects, rose, fully armed with a cold, singular focus. Mark didn't realize that in trying to manipulate me into a scavenger hunt, he had given his prey the single most valuable tool, a piece of external evidence. He had given me the beginning of a thread that I would pull until his entire conspiracy unraveled. This was no longer a marriage. It was a high-stakes, life-or-death counterintelligence operation, and I had just been given the access key to their destruction. The clock was a relentless, audible hammer in the silence of the room. 7 days. Find the ghost. Save the children. I accepted the mission, not as an act of repentance, but as an initiation into my new role as the hunter. I was now fighting not for Mark's forgiveness, but for my absolute, uncompromised freedom, and I would dismantle every piece of the Evelyn Clara Mark conspiracy to get it. I knew that if he was willing to use the children as leverage, I had to be willing to expose his darkest secrets and risk everything. The game had truly begun. The urgency of the situation was a physical pressure, squeezing the air from my lungs. I had to assume that Evelyn was already running countermeasures. She was not a woman who left anything to chance. Her entire persona was a study in calculated control. I remembered an incident 5 years prior when I had dared to challenge her tax advice, a seemingly minor point about my parental contributions to the mortgage. She had reacted with a chilling, surgical calm, withdrawing her entire presence from our lives for 6 months, effectively isolating Mark and making him utterly miserable until I conceded the point, apologizing for my disrespect. That wasn't mere bitterness, it was strategic withdrawal of affection to enforce compliance. I realized that every minor conflict over the years, from the vacation destinations to the brand of car we purchased, was a small skirmish in Evelyn's grand war to assert ultimate, final control over Mark and, by extension, our finances. The affair, which should have been a private tragedy, was now an unexpected opportunity for them to complete their final objective, the theft of the house. My mind raced through the protocols. Step 1, establish a digital baseline. I needed to know exactly what Mark was watching. I pretended to sob in the living room chair directly under the shelf camera, making exaggerated gestures of despair, while simultaneously scanning the room's Wi-Fi network using a discrete app on my work phone. The network showed an unusual number of external connections, more than just the 5 cameras. He was routing the surveillance feed through an external, encrypted VPN server, likely controlled by Evelyn's contacts. This wasn't a jealous husband setup. It was a professional, high-security surveillance net. I realized I couldn't simply destroy the cameras. That would expose my hand immediately. I had to use them. I needed to create a ghost feed, a looped video of my compliant movements to play for the hidden audience while I conducted my investigation off-grid. This would take time, and time was the one commodity I lacked. I turned my attention back to the silver key. The 3 intertwined serpent's crest. It was a common symbol in European heraldry, often associated with medicine or wisdom, but in a darker context, it symbolized Trinity and deception. Evelyn, Clara, and Mark. The 3 conspirators, perpetually intertwined, perpetually deceiving. I had to find the lock. A high-security safe deposit box. This meant a bank, or a private vault. Mark's habits were predictable. He used the most high-end, discreet services. I ruled out our local bank. Evelyn would never entrust a conspiracy of this magnitude to a local branch. It had to be a regional bank, far enough away to ensure privacy, but close enough for easy access, likely near Mark's workplace in the financial district, 45 minutes away. My knowledge of Mark's professional life suddenly became my greatest asset. He was obsessed with an antique mahogany vault box in his office, claiming it was for sentimental papers. He kept the key, a common brass one, on his keychain. I realized Mark was prone to distraction and prone to substituting the real security measures with sentimental copies. The brass key was a distraction. The silver key was the weapon. I analyzed my next 168 hours. Mark would be home every evening, watching the surveillance feed and running his gaslighting campaigns. My window for action would be during my daily commute and during the evening, using my new role as the compliant wife as a shield. The impossible task had been set: find Clara, the ghost, in 7 days, using nothing but a key and my years of suppressed rage. The psychological toll of the last decade suddenly crystallized not as trauma, but as fuel. Every sleepless night spent studying, every argument with Clara that resulted in a migraine, every tear I cried over Mark's cold indifference, all of it was being converted into cold, surgical determination. I was no longer fighting for my marriage, I was fighting for the life and financial security of my children against 3 high-functioning sociopaths. I took the silver key, wrapped it carefully in a piece of sterile gauze, I would not leave my fingerprints on the primary evidence, and slipped it into a hidden, deep pocket of my professional blazer. The game was on, and I had just made my first move. I looked directly into the smoke detector camera above the kitchen island, forcing a single, well-timed tear to trace a path down my cheek, providing Mark and Evelyn with the exact footage of remorse they so desperately craved. The performance was perfect. But beneath the surface, the warrior was calculating the kill stroke. Part 2, Echoes of the In-Law Asylum. My home was no longer a place of rest or refuge, it was an active, high-definition interrogation room. I played the role of the remorseful, compliant wife for the high-definition lenses, moving through my daily routines with a chilling, manufactured composure. Every sigh, every slow, deliberate gesture of wiping the kitchen counter was a performance for Mark and, more dangerously, for Evelyn, who I knew was watching the surveillance feed remotely. Yet, beneath this fragile facade, my mind was a covert command center, running complex diagnostics on 2 decades of psychological abuse, analyzing it not as family dysfunction, but as a meticulously planned criminal siege. Evelyn, the matriarch, had never been an irrational tyrant. She was a master strategist of emotional exploitation. Her control was subtle, systemic, and utterly devastating. I cataloged the tactics, her constant, smiling critiques of my homemaking, my clothes, my career choices, were designed not just to hurt, but to generate continuous, isolated stress, slowly eroding my sense of self-worth. When I excelled professionally, she would subtly undermine it by suggesting my success was a detriment to the children's proper upbringing. When I stayed home with the kids, she labeled me financially irresponsible. This was not just typical mother-in-law meddling, this was strategic psychological torture aimed at creating a perpetually unstable, self-doubting victim. The withdrawal of financial and emotional support from Mark, only to be replaced by highly conditional, transactional gestures toward the children, was a textbook example of calculated attachment sabotage. She ensured our children saw me as the source of tension, the perpetually exhausted, stressed-out mother, and her as the comforting, stable grandmother. She effectively weaponized their filial affection against me. My focus shifted back to the final, chaotic fight and Clara's essential role. I needed to reconstruct that scene with cold, forensic precision. I recalled the raw, animalistic terror that erupted when Mark recorded me. It wasn't my rage that defined the moment, it was Clara's chilling, calculated threat, "I'm calling the police on you for assault." I realized that this phrase, seemingly a reaction to my hysteria, was actually the activation of a pre-planned legal script designed to establish my psychological instability as a preemptive defense against any future exposure of their financial schemes. They needed documented proof that I was the aggressor, the emotionally compromised party, should the police ever be called for their corporate theft. My covert investigation began in Clara's abandoned room. The air still felt toxic, charged with the memory of her hostile presence. The room itself was a clue. It was unnaturally sterile, scrubbed of any personal warmth or evidence, a sign of a highly planned departure, not a panicked escape. I spent hours methodically examining every fixture. I eventually found the prize under a loose floorboard near the HVAC vent, a classic hiding spot from the very spy thrillers Mark used to obsess over. There it was, a small, tightly bound canvas notepad, water-damaged but filled with intricate alphanumeric sequences. It was not a diary, but a coded logbook of movements and transactions. The knot in my stomach tightened as I began the translation process. Working in the dead of night, using the white noise of the dishwasher and the hum of the dehumidifier as acoustic covers against any hidden microphones, I cracked the code. I had recognized the format as a modified Vigil Cipher, a simple substitution key I'd used years ago during a complex compliance project at my previous job. My dormant professional skills were now my tools of survival. The entries were logistical, cold, and utterly incriminating. One sequence, repeated several times and underlined in red, detailed the timing of their exit strategy. READ LOC 7 to 10 a.m. CHASTEP, reading, location 7, Sunday at 10 a.m. The timestamp was 1 week after her supposed, homeless, taxi ride to London. Clara's disappearance was a staged operation. It was an elaborately financed exit designed to give Mark a new, sacred wound to nurse, redirecting his own financial panic as grief. The full scale of Mark's complicity became terrifyingly clear. He wasn't merely a puppet of his mother. He was a willing, active conspirator, too terrified of losing Evelyn's financial leverage and status to protect his own wife. My ultimatum hadn't driven Clara away. It had simply forced them to execute their criminal exit strategy ahead of schedule. I needed to secure the key to the final lock. The silver key. I couldn't risk taking it out of the house, so I used an industrial laser pointer, discreetly borrowed from my office supply cabinet, to take a high-resolution, millimeter-accurate photograph of the key's intricate, non-standard cut. I sent the image, labeled Antique Furniture Restoration Query, to a professional forensic locksmith contact I had cultivated years ago. The reply was immediate and terrifying. "Anna, this isn't an antique. It's a key to a high-security, tamper-proof safe deposit box, the kind used for securing millions in assets or incriminating corporate documents." The key was Mark's insurance policy, the final proof, not Clara's sentimental memento. He had hidden the financial evidence of their crime in a place he thought I could never access. My mind raced through the protocols of the digital counter-surveillance. I realized that my own movements were predictable. Mark called me during my entire 45-minute commute. I had to create a distraction. I spent the next afternoon, all under the scrutiny of the cameras, methodically cleaning the inside of my car, installing a new Bluetooth headset, and making exaggerated gestures of deep, heartfelt apologies for my infidelity during a fake phone call. The truth was, I was meticulously mapping out a Faraday cage strategy and a route for a ghost run. The urgency was a constant, sharp pain in my chest. I used the financial software on my work laptop, cloaking my activity under a massive Q3 budget review file. My searches for property deeds and shell company registrations in reading were masked. I found the financial paper trail. Mark had been terminated for cause a week before Clara's staged disappearance. The reason: felony level misappropriation and diversion of corporate assets. The money stolen, enough to buy the reading property, directly coincided with Clara's engineered escape. His dramatic physical decline wasn't heartbreak. It was the raw, paralyzing fear of prison and the loss of his mother's financial leverage. My affair was just a perfect smokescreen, allowing him to reframe his panic as grief. I cross-referenced the Cipher's coordinates, reading, LOC 7, with property deeds linked to Evelyn's network. I found the address, a luxury studio complex with high security and privacy. Clara wasn't in some flea-bag apartment. She was in a funded, discreet hideout. The remaining Cipher sequence, CHASTEP, finally yielded to my decryption efforts. It wasn't a random sequence. It was the complex, unique password to the safe deposit box, an acronym for a phrase Mark frequently boasted about to friends: corporate high-asset security target, Evelyn's protection. He had hidden the key and the code right in front of me, confident I was too broken to notice the subtle clues he left for himself. I was no longer simply Anna, the betrayed wife. I was a target who had successfully infiltrated a highly organized financial crime ring. I had the location of the ghost, the details of the crime, the physical key, and the digital code to the vault. I was now the hunter, and the next move was mine. Part 3: The Ghost of the Missing Sister. My survival was now dependent on becoming an invisible predator in my own house. Mark continued his relentless campaign of gaslighting and surveillance, but his actions were predictable, theatrical, and ultimately clumsy. He would subtly move essential items, my passport, the children's favorite backpack, the master keys to the garage, all in a deliberate effort to make me question my own memory and competence. "Did you put the checkbook in the freezer, Anna? You seem very distracted," he would suggest, his voice layered with fake concern, attempting to manufacture the psychological instability his mother, Evelyn, so desperately needed for their divorce filing. I responded with a manufactured calm, my eyes wide with confusion, a perfect performance of the victim losing her grasp on reality, all for the benefit of the hidden cameras. My most critical objective for this phase was to expose the financial crime at the core of their conspiracy, securing the evidence before the 7-day deadline expired. I had the silver key and the deciphered code, but I needed the full paper trail that linked Mark's termination to Clara's fake disappearance. I began my daily commute, which was now a high-stakes intelligence run. I continued the mandatory 45-minute phone call with Mark, feeding him monotonous updates on my imaginary work projects. While he listened to my carefully modulated voice, I utilized the discrete screen of my work laptop, cloaking my searches under a massive, innocuous file labeled Project Phoenix, Q4 Budget Realignment. My searches were laser-focused: corporate ethics violation codes, felony-level embezzlement statutes, and detailed public records of commercial property sales in the reading area. The financial investigation quickly yielded the most explosive evidence. I had suspected Mark lost his job. The truth was far more damning. He hadn't just lost focus, he had been terminated for cause 3 days before the staged argument that led to Clara's escape. The official cause was listed as felony-level misappropriation and diversion of corporate assets, a corporate euphemism for high-level theft. The amount stolen was substantial, a figure large enough to not only purchase the luxury apartment in Reading outright but also to fund Clara's long-term, comfortable exile. This theft was the true catalyst for the entire series of events. It wasn't my ultimatum that drove Clara away. It was the immediate need to launder the stolen corporate funds into an untraceable asset under a shell corporation before Mark's company audited the missing money. Mark's dramatic collapse, the weight loss, the premature graying, was instantly recontextualized. It wasn't the pain of a betrayed husband, it was the sheer, paralyzing fear of prison and the catastrophic loss of Evelyn's financial approval. My affair, which I had believed was the cause of his suffering, was merely a convenient smokescreen, allowing him to reframe his panic as grief over betrayal, diverting my attention from the financial fraud that truly threatened his life. I cross-referenced the Cipher's coordinates, READ LOC 7, with property deeds purchased by the Shell Corporation. I found the address, a luxury studio complex with high security and privacy in Reading, complete with a coded entry system and a secure parking garage. Clara was not a victim of my madness, she was a criminal beneficiary of Mark's corporate theft. The remaining Cipher sequence, CHASTEP, had been bothering me. It had to be the code for the safe deposit box. I ran the acronym through every personal mnemonic I knew Mark used: birthdays, old fraternity chants, his mother's corporate slogans. Finally, it clicked. It was his desperate attempt at self-assurance, corporate high-asset security target, Evelyn's protection. He was so deep in his mother's control that even his escape code was a tribute to her perceived power. With the location of the ghost, the evidence of the crime, and the key and code to the vault secured, I focused on the next hurdle, Clara's logbook. I continued decrypting the canvas notepad, hoping to find a map or a meeting schedule. The entries were a chilling chronicle of my psychological abuse. They weren't just about financial transactions. They contained subtle notes on my behavior. Anna distracted today, stress levels high. Check on prescription switch, and Mark must record Anna during argument 17. Focus on hysteria for legal. This confirmed every terrifying suspicion. The abuse was choreographed, scripted, and logged. I discovered a recurring log entry, St.L. 10 a.m., Sunday, Evelyn. It wasn't just Sunday at 10 a.m., but St.L. I recognized the abbreviation from an old family map as a specific, highly exclusive coffee shop in a quiet London suburb. This was their physical command and control center. The meeting wasn't in Reading. Evelyn was traveling to London every Sunday to manage the conspiracy. The next meeting was in less than 48 hours. My mission crystallized. I needed to execute a ghost run to the safe deposit box, secure the incriminating paper trail, and then immediately intercept Clara in Reading before Evelyn arrived for her final inspection. The high-stakes chess game was moving into its brutal endgame. I realized I couldn't trust my body to stay calm. The weight of the conspiracy, knowing my husband and his family had actively and meticulously plotted my ruin for years, was crushing. I took a brief, calculated moment of pure catharsis. I went into the bathroom, turned the shower on full blast to mask any sound from the hidden microphone I suspected was planted there, and punched the ceramic tiles until my knuckles bled. It was a brief, painful release, a raw acknowledgement that the victim was dead, and the predator was fully awake. I returned to the kitchen, applied a cold compress to my knuckles, and gave the smoke detector camera a perfect, vacant stare of remorseful exhaustion. The performance continued, but the truth was burning. I was ready to risk prison, but I would never allow them to touch my children or the life I had built. I discreetly transferred the Cipher translation and the financial evidence I had gathered onto an encrypted microSD card and sealed it in a tiny, waterproof bag. This was my dead man's switch, a fail-safe. If I disappeared, the evidence would still go to my parents, the only people I trusted implicitly, and their attorney. I was ready for the fight. I had everything I needed to dismantle the conspiracy. The only thing standing in my way was Mark's professional surveillance net and the ticking clock counting down to Evelyn's final check-in. Part 4, The Digital Prison and the Unseen Hand. The cold, surgical certainty of my discovery, Mark's corporate termination for felony-level embezzlement coinciding perfectly with Clara's staged disappearance, shredded the last remnants of my misplaced guilt. I was no longer the guilty wife seeking forgiveness. I was a target who had successfully infiltrated a high-stakes financial crime ring. My goal shifted entirely, from winning back my husband's trust to securing the evidence to bury him and his conspirators. The tension inside the house was a palpable, suffocating force. Mark sensed my shift from broken victim to cold hunter. His passive-aggressive control immediately escalated into overt psychological intimidation and erratic behavior. He abandoned the tearful victim act altogether. Now, his eyes were sharp, filled with a frantic, desperate cunning. He began a calculated campaign of gaslighting designed to break my sanity before the 7-day deadline expired. He would subtly move small, crucial items, my passport, the children's school permission slips, the garage door opener, and then feign confusion and pity when I searched frantically. "Did you put the checkbook in the freezer again, Anna? You seem dangerously distracted," he would murmur, his voice dripping with fake concern, all designed to manufacture the psychological instability Evelyn so desperately needed for their divorce case. I was forced to maintain a facade of confusion and growing despair for the benefit of the 5 high-definition lenses, acting out the role of the wife slowly losing her grip on reality. My most critical objective for this phase was to execute the ghost run, my off-grid journey to the safe deposit box, and secure the incriminating paper trail before Evelyn's Sunday check-in. To do this, I had to successfully break Mark's surveillance net without alerting either him or Evelyn. I began my preparations under the cover of a frantic Saturday of cleaning, a task Mark always expected me to perform. I constructed a makeshift Faraday cage from an old metal tin and several layers of heavy-duty aluminum foil. I placed my GPS-tracked phone deep inside the basement laundry hamper, ensuring a complete GPS and cellular blackout. I carried an untraceable, prepaid burner phone with just enough credit to execute a single, quick, bad signal, check-in call, feigning a sudden signal drop near a notorious dead zone on the highway during my supposed errands. This bought me a precious 4-hour window of total, untracked operational silence. The true genius of their surveillance lay not in the visible cameras, but in the digital routing. I had previously determined that the live surveillance feed from the 5 cameras was being uploaded not to a local server, but to a private, heavily encrypted cloud drive controlled by Evelyn. She was watching my every move, in real time, waiting for a sign of collapse. I couldn't simply turn off the cameras, that would trigger an immediate alert. I utilized my advanced professional skills. Before leaving the house, I logged into Mark's secure home server using an old, obscure technician password he had forgotten I knew. I set up a timed countermeasure. I uploaded a high-resolution, 24-hour looped video of myself doing monotonous domestic chores, cooking, cleaning, reading a book in my chair, a ghost feed designed to fool Evelyn's remote monitoring system. For the next 24 hours, Evelyn would be watching a meticulously constructed video simulation of my despair, entirely unaware that the real Anna was miles away, dismantling her conspiracy. The ghost run began. I drove straight to the regional bank. I had the silver key and the deciphered, corporate high-asset security target, Evelyn's protection code. The atmosphere inside the bank's security vault lobby was sterile and hushed, the perfect backdrop for securing criminal evidence. I used the key and the code on the terminal. It worked flawlessly. The safe deposit box, the heart of their secret, was now open. But as I reached for the box, an unexpected, chilling piece of evidence hit me. Tucked into the side of the vault access panel was a small, nearly invisible note written on a slip of banking paper. It was not for me. It was for Mark, written in Evelyn's elegant, unmistakable handwriting. A is breaking. Do not break protocol. C's exit must remain clean. Check local police reports for her accident. The word accident froze the blood in my veins. Clara's staged disappearance was not just about theft, it was about covering an active crime. They were prepared for a scenario where Clara was either harmed or killed, potentially making my violent outburst the cause. The conspiracy was darker, more lethal, than I had imagined. I quickly retrieved the contents of the safe deposit box. It was not gold or cash, but paper, certified copies of Evelyn's shell company transfers, detailed receipts for the reading studio, and the smoking gun, a handwritten, notarized contract between Mark and Evelyn. The contract explicitly detailed the plan to legally seize the house after my voluntary departure, citing my documented, emotional instability as the legal justification. He had been so focused on winning the legal battle over my infidelity that he forgot the cardinal rule of criminality: leave no paper trail. I immediately photographed every document with a secure, time-stamped camera app, backed up the data to my encrypted microSD card, and resealed the original documents in the vault, leaving the scene untouched. I had what I needed. The financial evidence of the conspiracy was secured. My focus immediately shifted to the final, most dangerous phase, the confrontation. I had to intercept Clara in reading to secure a recorded confession, tying the fraud and the abuse directly to Mark and Evelyn, completing the chain of evidence before Evelyn arrived for her final check-in. I drove straight toward reading, transforming my emotional landscape from controlled fear to cold, focused determination. The audio jammer Mark had used in the argument was now my inspiration. Before arriving at the apartment, I used my burner phone to purchase a small, commercial-grade audio recorder and a frequency scrambler from an anonymous electronics shop in a nearby suburb. I knew Evelyn's people might have listening devices in Clara's apartment. I was walking into a trap, but I would control the sound. I was no longer just gathering evidence, I was actively manipulating the criminal battlefield. The hunter was walking into the lion's den, armed not with a gun, but with paper, a recorder, and the ghost feed of my own simulated despair. Part 5. The Confrontation in the Shadow. The clock was screaming at me. It was Sunday, 9:20 a.m. Evelyn's encrypted text message, which I had intercepted through my deep dive into Mark's server logs, confirmed her arrival at the London check-in point, meaning she was driving toward Reading, now just 90 minutes away. I had to execute the confrontation phase flawlessly and be gone before the mastermind arrived. My fear was not of failure, but of being physically trapped by Evelyn, a woman whose chilling composure disguised a capacity for ruthless violence and financial annihilation. The drive to the luxurious Reading studio complex was a blur of hypervigilance. My mind was running 1,000 scenarios, analyzing angles of attack and exit routes. My custom-built Faraday cage with my tracked phone was safely tucked away, feeding the ghost feed loop of the compliant Anna back to Evelyn's remote monitoring system. I was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. I parked my car 4 blocks away in a public garage, preferring the anonymity of foot traffic. I carried only my encrypted microSD card, the dead man's switch, the silver key, and the small, commercial-grade audio recorder concealed in my professional blazer's inner pocket, along with the frequency scrambler I'd purchased. I was walking into the enemy's sanctuary, armed with truth and technology. I approached the secure entrance of the complex. I used the simple, low-tech ruse that had always worked best on people expecting high-tech threats. I rang the buzzer for Clara's unit and identified myself as a secure parcel courier, signature required for financial documents. It was a risk, but my knowledge of their financial paranoia suggested it would be the one prompt she couldn't ignore. The moment Clara opened the door, the air in the hallway congealed. The woman who stood before me was a ghost of the sneering viper I knew. Her face was a mask of absolute, paralyzing animalistic fear, her eyes darting nervously toward the elevator and the stairwell. She wore expensive, casual clothing, a stark contrast to the homeless narrative Mark was tearfully maintaining. My initial suspicion was immediately confirmed. She was holding a tiny, swaddled newborn baby. I pushed the door open just wide enough to slip through, my hand gripping the recorder. "Don't scream, Clara." "Mark sent me," I said, my voice cold, surgical, and utterly devoid of emotion, focusing her terror. "But I didn't come to save you. I came for the truth. I found the Redacted Cipher, the shell company records, and the evidence of the felony corporate theft that got your brother fired. I have the key and the code to the vault. Tell me every detail of the conspiracy, or I walk out right now. Evelyn arrives, and you lose the house, the money, and your protection from Mark's fraud charges." The carefully constructed facade of the victim in exile shattered. Clara physically recoiled, her back hitting the wall, the sound muffled by the luxury wallpaper. It was Mum. She planned the whole thing from the beginning, she shrieked, the confession tumbling out in a torrent of desperate tears and gasps. The sight of the baby was the final, devastating piece of their manipulative puzzle. I pointed to the child. "The baby. Is that the new life you needed to justify the disappearance?" Clara sobbed uncontrollably, confirming my darkest guess. "It's not mine. It's a relative's child. We needed a perfect, sympathetic visual prop to justify my new life on the run. Mum needed a reason for the property purchase and a sympathy angle for Mark's legal defense. The conspiracy was even more grotesque than I had imagined. They were using an innocent infant as a tool for financial fraud and emotional manipulation. The full, horrifying scope of Evelyn's plan was laid bare. She had been grooming Mark for years, leveraging his deep-seated financial fear and filial guilt to isolate me. Their true, singular goal, to provoke my emotional collapse, which would grant Mark full legal ownership of the house, the asset my parents had largely paid for, free of my claims, maximizing their inheritance. The psychological abuse, the gaslighting, the surveillance, the threats, was all part of the script designed to generate my madness. "Your affair," Clara wailed, "it destroyed the timeline. We expected you to be broken and defeated within weeks. Instead, you sought connection, you felt cherished. Mark lost the moral high ground he needed to win. He couldn't just call you crazy anymore. He needed the sister's disappearance to make your madness seem lethal." I asked the most crucial question, leaning in, ensuring the recorder picked up every word. "Tell me about Mark's involvement. Was he coerced, or was he complicit?" Clara looked away, shame replacing fear. "He was fully and actively complicit. He recorded you not just for leverage, but to provide preemptive legal defense against your accusations of abuse and financial crime. Mom promised him that if he followed her plan, she would clear the debt and secure his future. The devastated husband act was a calculated, criminal masquerade. I had the complete, recorded confession, linking the abuse, the fraud, the staged disappearance, and the complicity of all three actors. I quickly transferred the audio file to my secure microSD card, a duplicate of the one I had already prepared. Just as I finished the data transfer, my burner phone vibrated with a text from the anonymous tracker I had placed on Evelyn's secondary vehicle, a tiny, untraceable device I'd attached during one of her rare visits to our neighborhood. "Target approaching. 2 minutes." Evelyn was rounding the final corner. I looked at Clara, who was now a trembling mess, clutching the baby like a shield. "I have everything I need," I said, my voice cold, surgical, and utterly devoid of the emotion she wanted to see. "Your brother gave me the key to his vault, and you just handed me the map. Your mother is at the door. You have a choice: face Evelyn's rage and go to prison, or save yourself by staying silent and accepting the consequences." I turned and walked out, my spine rigid, the silver key warm in my hand. I didn't look back. I didn't care about Clara's fate. My only priority was to get the evidence to my lawyer. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of their implosion, and the grand finale, the final reckoning in the courtroom, was about to begin. The time for sorrow was over, the time for justice had arrived. Part 6, Bittersweet Victory and the Reckoning. I didn't return to the house, my gilded cage, immediately. The evidence I carried was too volatile, too dangerous to risk losing. The moment I walked out of Clara's apartment, leaving her to face the imminent, terrifying arrival of her mother, Evelyn, my personal war transitioned from the covert field to the cold, stark reality of the legal battlefield. My priority was simple: secure the truth. I drove straight to my lawyer's downtown office. I didn't schedule an appointment. I walked past the receptionist, bypassing protocol, and presented my lawyer, a sharp, seasoned woman named Helen, with a briefcase of digital and physical proof. I placed the silver key, the encrypted microSD card, containing the secured audio confession and time-stamped photos of the vault documents, and the decoded Cipher sheet on her desk. Helen, initially expecting a messy divorce case focused on infidelity, stared at the evidence with widening, professional shock. The case was no longer about marital fault, it was a full-scale indictment against an organized criminal enterprise. The next morning, Helen, armed with the silver key and the deciphered code, accessed the safe deposit box. Inside, the final, devastating proof was secured: not money, but paper, certified copies of Evelyn's shell company transfers, the detailed receipts for the reading studio, and the most crucial element, a handwritten, notarized contract between Mark and Evelyn. This contract explicitly detailed the plan to legally seize the house after my voluntary departure, citing my documented, emotional instability as the legal justification. He had been so consumed with winning the legal battle over my infidelity, he had forgotten the cardinal rule of criminality: leave no paper trail. I walked into the courtroom prepared for a complex battle over marital assets, I instead delivered a surgical strike. Mark and Evelyn arrived, maintaining their fragile masks of wounded dignity. They were utterly unprepared for the avalanche of undeniable, time-stamped evidence. The court proceedings were swift and merciless. Helen presented the evidence of corporate fraud, wire transfer conspiracy, and documented psychological abuse, the gaslighting, the surveillance feeds, ghost feed, deception, and the staged disappearance. Mark's lawyer, utterly blindsided by the depth of the criminal conspiracy, was forced to advise his client to concede. The reckoning, the divorce, was a ruthless, surgical dismantling of their criminal organization. The evidence of Mark's corporate fraud and Evelyn's long-term financial conspiracy was irrefutable. Mark was forced to resign from his career permanently, facing a lifetime ban from his industry and crippling financial penalties and restitution payments to his former employer. Evelyn's shell companies were immediately dissolved, and a substantial portion of her personal and corporate assets was seized to compensate me for years of emotional distress and financial targeting. Justice, cold, precise, and absolute, had finally won. The three conspirators, Evelyn, Mark, and Clara, were left isolated, facing the full, terrifying collapse of their fabricated lives and their financial empire. Bittersweet victory. I secured the house, the asset my parents had largely funded, along with full, undisputed custody of my children, and guaranteed financial independence. I had achieved safety, vindication, and the kind of freedom I hadn't known existed. The victory was sweet because I didn't just survive a 20-year siege, I annihilated the architects of my own destruction. I took control of my own narrative and my children's future. But the victory was profoundly bitter. The man I married, the college sweetheart I genuinely loved, had chosen to actively and maliciously conspire to destroy me, sacrificing our family for his mother's greed and his own fear. The years of love were revealed to be a fragile illusion built on systemic betrayal and calculated abuse. The loss of that shared past, the realization that the man I married was a monster, was a permanent, dull ache. I never offered the court any pretense of guilt or remorse for the affair. It was the desperate, primal act that proved I was still alive when they thought I was broken beyond repair. My infidelity was the fuse that blew the lid off a toxic, criminal conspiracy. I had fought a decades-long psychological war for my sanity, and I walked away victorious, carrying the scars of a survivor, but finally, eternally free. If you like this format and the psychological theme, let us know what topics you'd like to hear next.